Thank you, Ken, for accepting to be our first speaker. Ken is coming all the way from Canada. Good morning for you, actually.
It is indeed, yes.
And good afternoon, good evening, good morning for everybody else, depending on the time zone. We'll be going through quickly we are actually in the welcome and overview part now. I'll show you what we have planned for next meetups. Afterwards, then Ken will show us his stuff. So let's move forward, just to make sure everybody's on the same page and we won't have problem with the internet connection during Ken's presentation. Please make sure that your microphones are muted and the camera, the video is turned off. Normally the chat should be okay, and you should have a chat, so please ask your questions on the chat. If the chat is not working because we saw some small glitches earlier, just raise the hand and we'll stop for unmuting and asking your questions. If you have internet problems and you have to disconnect, stay assured the Teams will go on and it's recording. Just log in again and it's not a problem. The same it's applicable for Ken and me. If we are dropping off, we'll rejoin. And as I said, the meeting is recorded and it will be shared on YouTube in the next few days. I don't know exactly, probably tomorrow. So what we have next in March 25, 25th in English, Marco Russo will come and have a first ever type of session with us. I don't know, for whoever it's Marco's fan, he's been starting a new experiment. He's publishing a video 1 week, and then after a week, people are asking questions about that specific video, and everybody's having access to the file, and he's answering questions live. We will be the first user group that will have this honor, so we'll have a video published on the 17th of March. Only the meetup people will be allowed to ask questions, and he's coming on the 25th of March to answer your questions and also the live questions that anybody could have. Next, on April 29th, actually, not 2nd, Matt Ellington will be present. And he gave us a set of several topics that we can choose what he'll be talking about. I'll send you a form, and everybody's having the same rights to choose. So depending on the vote, we'll have Matt in April with a feature presentation. And then in May, Reza Rad accepted to be our guest, and he'll be speaking about some topics, probably on Power Query. We are not sure yet, but we'll know until then for sure. Next, let's focus for today. We are having Ken. His session is about 75 minutes, right, Ken?
Yeah, let's say ish.
We'll
see what it runs to.
Ken will take questions via the chat as we go. Actually, I took several courses delivered by Ken, and he's my favorite Power Query and dimensional teacher. We even met in person in 2019 in Bulgaria and Slovenia.
Yeah, back when we were allowed to travel the world, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the good thing now that we can see more often in different meetups like this.
This is true.
I've learned a lot from Ken, and I'm still learning. And he's actually listened to some of my suggestions during these years. Ken is an MVP since 2006 in different categories: Excel, data platform for Power BI, and now Office apps, I think. Right, Ken?
Yeah, I think that's what they call us now. Originally it was Excel, then it was data platform, or well, data platform is the category that looks after Power BI, and then I think now we're called Office Apps and Services is what looks after the Excel side. So
And more about Ken,
longer titles.
he'll say more about himself during the presentation. So the stage is yours, Ken.
All right, so I'll tell you what then. If I can just get folks to mute on their own side, I'm also going to turn off my my camera to make sure that we keep the maximum amount of bandwidth on our side here. At least I am once I bring my Teams window back. It's one of those features I would change is where it keeps dropping off. And hopefully, can you guys see my screen right now? That's the big question. Excellent. All right, cool. So, so welcome to Build Better Excel Models Faster. What I'm going to be showing you guys today is I'm going to show you, we're going to do this in a couple of different methods here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and build an Excel business intelligence model the slow way, the long way, the normal way that you would actually go through and do something. And it's a simple model. And I'm going to do it all manually. And then we're going to circle back and we're going to actually show how I can actually use monkey tools to actually build this a lot faster when we're done here. So it's not going to be hopefully not a super rush journey on this one here. And obviously, I absolutely want to make sure that you guys are open to be able to ask me questions. I'm not sure our chat window is actually working, unfortunately. So if there are any questions, please just throw up the raised hand, and we can call you to go off mute and ask your questions as well as we go along here.
I've just sent a message to everybody.
Yep.
Not sure that you saw it.
Yeah, I can't see the chat window at all, unfortunately. So it's kind of a shame because that would be super useful. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'll take the raised hand or Christian, if you've got the chat and people are actually putting in there, if you want to interrupt and moderate the questions to me, that works too. I'm open to either.
As long as I see them, yes.
Yeah, there you
Gladly.
go. Okay, so just for those of you who don't know me, I'll give you a real brief intro as to who I am. My name is Ken. I am a chartered professional accountant. Originally was a certified management accountant, but a few years ago we merged all of our accounting designations in Canada under the umbrella of CPA. I also have an F in front of my designation. That designates me as a fellow, which is an honor that's given to about 4% of accountants in their careers, which recognizes some of the work that I've done to help advance the accounting profession in certain areas. I run a little website called excelguru.ca, which you may or may not have heard of. I've got a technology blog there. I've got a free help forum, a lot of different help articles on things. So that's sort of where I kind of grew up. Once upon a time, I used to have a real job where I actually worked as the controller and director of IT of a company. I now am at Excel Guru full-time, and basically in a normal world, what I do is I fly around the world and teach people how to use Excel and Power BI properly, but the last year has obviously been a little bit different. I am also related to that, I am one of the founding partners behind a website called skillwave.training. This is our online video platform. It's a joint effort between myself and Miguel Escobar and Matt Allington, where we actually have a Power Query Academy and a dimensional modeling course where we actually teach people how to do these things properly. So if you're looking for good business intelligence training, please jump on and take a look at what we actually have to offer there. I am a Microsoft MVP, as Christian mentioned. I have been since 2006. I spent 10 years as an Excel MVP. I spent a few years as a data platform MVP, which is a category that looks after Power BI. And since 2019, I've been in the category Office Apps and Services, which is the new longer name that looks after all of the Office apps, including Excel. The other thing that I am is I'm a software developer and an author. I do a lot of different things, as you can see, from accounting to IT to software development, writing books, and all that kind of stuff. I've written the book M is for Data Monkey. We are working on the second edition of that book now. I've also written the tools that I'm going to show you today, Monkey Tools, which is an add-in for Excel that works with Excel and Power BI. Before I jump into showing you that, though, I do want to talk a little bit about how I actually go and set up my solutions, because that will end up playing into what we're actually looking at today. So basically, when we start building a solution, we always start, of course, with data. This is kind of an important thing to start with, because if you're not starting with real data, you're making stuff up, and that's not really ethical. So we always want to start from, from real stuff to begin with. What we then do is we use Power Query to go and get our data and transform it into the shapes that we need. Now, a lot of people will connect to their data and they do all of their data transformations in one query before they load it to a load destination. I don't actually do that. I set my stuff up this way. I have a query that connects to the raw data source, and basically the purpose of this is to normalize the data and expose everything that I've got access to. I create a staging query that filters it down and reshapes the data in the way that I might need in order to get it ready to load to my fact or dimension tables. So the fact table will basically just take it, remove the extraneous columns I don't need. The dimension tables will do the same thing, maybe merge it with another query or something like that. From there, we get into the data model side of things. Once we've got our tables, we can then go in and we can create relations between them. We can create our DAX formulas in order to be able to drive the metrics that we need. And then we get into the final layer, which is where we go and create our visuals and reports. Now, this is the structure that I like to use. So that's what you're actually going to see as we go through here. Is this is generally how I go and approach the way that I actually build these up. And this works for both Excel and for Power BI, as the tooling sets that we have with Power Query and Power Pivot are the same technology layers that we actually use inside Power BI. Whether you're getting data, you're using Power Query for that. Whether you're doing the dimensional modeling stuff, it's the same technology as Power Pivot, granted one version newer than what's actually in Excel. My philosophy when I'm actually building my business intelligence solutions, if you come to me and you ask me, hey, can you build me a model, Ken? It ends up working like this. I start generally in Excel. Why? Because I love Excel. I've been working with Excel for a long time, and honestly, I like the flexibility that I get in Excel. I think it's a much better tool than Power BI for analyzing data and being able to dive really deep into it, because it's very, very fluid. I'm not bound to always working within a tabular format or always working with data that already exists. It's very easy to spin up new stuff or sanitize it and check it and things like that. Once I'm done building my dimensional model using Power Pivot and Power Query to get everything sort of set up and modeled correctly, I can then take that Excel workbook and I can actually publish it directly into Power BI from Excel. Once it's in Power BI, I can use the online report builders to go and build reports and then share it with my audience in a secure way, which means that building a model in Excel and then attaching it to an email and sending it out the door is not something that I would prefer to do. I would rather distribute it via Power BI, because I can build much more attractive reports that summarize the data, but I still get all of the security by sharing it that we need. This is the part that Excel never had, and that's where Power BI is infinitely better than what Excel was, right? The sharing scenario in Excel is the total wild, wild west. Now, alternately, there are sometimes some things that you need to do in Power BI Desktop. Let's say that you need to set up row-level security and things like that. You can't do that using this model. So in those cases, I might still start modeling in Excel, but then I'll go and import my Excel model into Power BI Desktop. I can go in and add the additional layers of things that I need, whether it's enriching it to use potentially a many-to-many join if required, or security joins for row-level security, things like that. We can build our reports right there, and then we can publish it to PowerBI.com. So again, it may still start in Excel. My life generally starts in Excel. I love it there. It's what I actually would prefer to do. But the nice thing about this is you can do this, and this is the way that I sort of tend to go at the stuff. Now, let's talk a little bit about Monkey Tools and how Monkey Tools fits into this thing. One of the things that people who know me well will know about me is that I am inherently lazy. I mean, efficient. I keep on getting that word messed up. So I don't like to put more effort into something that I need to. If I can actually get around to automating different processes, this is something that I'm super proud of and always want to try and do. And that's what Monkey Tools actually started as, was the opportunity to be able to automate the process of doing certain things. My target audience today is really built towards Excel users who are building models with Power Query and Power Pivot. I have a lot of control over what I can do inside Excel that I just cannot do inside Power BI. We just don't have the back-end infrastructure to allow the automation of building queries and stuff the way that we can in Excel. Now, the other thing, though, is that there's a second side to everything we build here. Building things is all great, but understanding what we've built is also really, really important, especially if you pick up a model that was built by somebody else. And this is another area where we try to add a lot of value here, is for users who need to audit models, either that they've built themselves or that they've received from others. One of the things that I love to do when I go to a conference is actually hang out at the Ask the Experts booth and let people come to me, and I try and answer their questions around what they have. And typically what happens is they'll come in and they'll say, I've got a problem with whatever. And I say, look, you know what, can I just plug this into my tool for a second, throw it on your USB, let me run this, I'll delete it when you're done, but I just want to see what your model looks like. And we'll run a report on it so that I can very quickly go through and try and get an understanding of what's actually happening. So that's one of the key focus areas of what we do with Monkey Tools. Now, we do have a pricing model with this one. This is a product that I actually pay a developer to work on full time, so we are trying to recover some of our costs in that. We do have what we call a forever free version. I'm a big advocate of the community. I mean, I'm an MVP because of the things that I do in public that I don't charge for. And there will always be a forever free version of Monkey Tools. And I'm going to call out those features when we go through as to what's free versus what's not. We have a pro trial license. This will allow you to do almost everything in the software that it offers for 2 weeks, and then it reverts down to the free license. So basically, if you look at it and go, geez, I don't use the pro features, well, hey, you know what? We hope we've added enough value that you'll keep the forever free version installed on your machine. And if you really like the pro license, then you can help us with the supporting of our development by buying a license subscription to that. The full details of the pricing and everything else you can pick up at this link here at xlguru.ca/monkeystools. This is in the recording here, and you can always check that out after the show here. So let's talk a little bit about what Monkey Tools does. When you install it, it actually installs on your computer, and it gives you a full new ribbon. For reference, you do not need admin rights to install this on your machine. We've worked hard to make that happen. And the other thing that I want to call out with Monkey Tools when you do this is that the only person that needs Monkey Tools is the person that's actually developing the solution. Once it's developed and you send it off to somebody else, it'll just work. There's nothing that we require for this to be installed in every scenario or every PC in the desktop. And this is something else that I'm very, very proud of, is that I only want to have this installed on the machines that actually need it. I don't want to get into a place where we're trying to force it across your organization. So we're trying to keep this as lightweight as possible. On our ribbon, we have two general types of features. We have what I call convenience features. Convenience features are essentially where we have just reused the buttons from the Excel user interface. The Get Data buttons are from the Data tab. That's where you go and get data. The Launch Power Query Editor is just one of the items that's underneath the Get Data menu, buried a lot further down. We're bringing it up right up front to where you need to be. Manage Data Model, it's on the Power Pivot tab. All the stuff under pivots and filters is on the Insert tab. We're just trying to bring it all into one place so that you don't have to flip tabs as much as you're doing this thing. And one of my good friends, Wynn Hopkins, actually had put in a suggestion to the Excel team to please build one ribbon for data modeling. And the Excel team has declined that suggestion. I unfortunately was not able to post before they close the thing, because that's what this is. This is one tab for your data modeling. So that's the first thing that we have. The second thing that we do is we actually add some Monkey Tools features. And these are the ones that we work really hard on here. These are things to try and make your life a little bit easier. So we're going to get into seeing how these things actually work as we go through. I'm going to walk through and build a model now nice and slowly, sort of with a regular data set. Then we'll come back, we'll run it through with Monkey Tools. I'm going to publish to Power BI because Christian asked me to show that, like, do you really publish this stuff to Power BI directly from Excel? So we're going to do that. And then time permitting, I'm going to see if I can't actually also unroll a sneak peek as to one of the things that we've been working on as well. So without further ado, I'm going to jump over into this little file over here. This is my Build Better sample that I'm working with, and I'm just going to show you right now there are no queries here at all. There is no data model in here either. What I have, or what I want to get to, is I want to build a report that looks like this with a nice little pivot table. I want a little pivot chart over here and maybe a timeline on it. What do I have to start with? I've got this. I've got a sales table, I have a categories table, and I have a budgets table. I'm going to need some other things along the way, though, in order to be able to actually go back and generate the items that we have over here. I'm going to need a calendar table because I need something to be able to drive all this stuff by date. I'm going to need some measures for sales and budgets, and also this one here called transactions that you can't build in a standard pivot table. This is going to need a DAX formula to make this one work. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the process of actually building this model up the way that I would go and do this. And basically what happens here is we're going to jump over into one of our tables over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this into Power Query. So on the Insert tab, you'll notice that if I jump over here for a second, sorry, my bad, on the Data tab, there we are. On the Data tab, you'll notice that I have the From Table Arrange button. I'll just show you on Monkey Tools. This is the exact same button. This is just going to save me flipping tabs, so I can go from table and I can actually bring this into the Power Query editor. So here we go. We've got a nice little sales table. I'm going to make a small change to this. I can't stand the fact that Power Query actually goes through and always puts a time on my rounded dates. So I'm just going to replace this. But I'm going to set this up in a staging manner. So basically what's going to happen with this one is I'm going to rename this guy here, and I'm going to call it raw data dash sales. So I want to load this as a connection. I don't want to load it anywhere else, but I want to have this as basically just my raw data. This shows me all the different tables or all the different columns and data that I have access to. I'm now going to set myself up for future by creating a reference to this. And this reference is just pointing back to the raw data sales. So anything that happens in raw data sales, any new data that I get is going to flow into this query, which I'm going to rename to staging-sales. This will allow me to do more things here, but still preserve my original raw data. Okay, so I'm just sort of setting up multiple layers going through this thing here. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this guy here, and I'm going to go to Reference. And on this one, this is going to be my final table sales that's going to load to the data model. Now, the important thing about this guy is that we always want to assign data types to as the last step before we load to our data model. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to press Control A to grab all of my columns. I'm going to go to Transform, and I'm going to choose Detect Data Type. This is the lazy or efficient way to try and actually get all your columns at once. And then from there, you can now go back and override any individual ones that you think need to be changed. So that's the first sort of staging layer that I'm setting up here. Now the challenge at this point is I'm going to go home, close and load. Now I've customized my load defaults to load to connection only by default, but you'll notice that I don't get to choose where these queries go. It basically says, okay, cool. You have created 3 queries in one session of Power Query. You get to choose one load destination. Do you want to load them all to individual worksheets, all to data model tables, or all to connection only? Well, the challenge is that I actually want to load these 2 to connection only and this one to the data model. I always go to connection only by default because this happens super fast. If I load them all to the data model, I've got to wait for all 3 of them to load. Then I've got to wait for changing 2 of them back. So as it is right now, I can go and say load 2. And we're going to change this to add it to the data model. And we've now got our sales table is loading in. There we go. Boom, there we go. So I just didn't want to see 3,284 rows load for each of those and then have to remove them. So that's the first part. Okay, so I've got my first sort of staging layer set up. I'm now going to do the same thing with these other guys. So I'll go and click on this one from table. And once again, I'm just going to go and say, okay, this one here is going to be raw data dash categories. I'm going to right click and choose reference on this guy here. I'm going to make staging dash categories. Right click and reference again. And we'll just call this one flat out categories. There we are. And then I'll set the data types here. Control A, transform, detect data type. All right. Those ones are set. I'm now going to go and say home, close and load again. Once again, I'm going to load them all to connection only. And then I'll change categories to load to the correct area. All of this work is being done to allow me some flexibility for some things that are going to come a little bit later, which I'll show you in a second here. So let's do the last one. We'll get budget. So here we go. And I'll show you an alternate way to do this as well. So I'm just going to go and set this guy up here. We're going to say, let's change this to a date, replace current. If you're working on these and you decide that you need to split a query because you didn't set it up in advance like this, you can also do this. You can come over to any step other than source. You can choose right click and you can actually extract all of the previous steps into a different query. So I could go and say, okay, let's extract this into a query called raw data dash budget. There we go. So we've now got a raw data budget, which has a source step. And that just shows me some data that looks like this. That's all good. I could come back to do raw or to my budget again, and I could go right click, extract previous. I'm going to go and say, let's call this one staging budget. Actually, I feel like making this plural. We're going to go budgets on that one. I'm going to rename this to budgets because that just makes me feel a little bit better. And now what we should see is by going to budgets and splitting a previous step, if I come back to budgets, you'll notice that this one refers to staging budgets because that was the most recent one that I split into its own category. And you'll notice here that we have our date time showing up. If I go back to staging budgets, it's only got one step that refers to raw data budgets. If I go back to raw data budgets, you'll notice that this refers to the current workbook for the budget table. If I change something here now, or I go and say, let's change this to a date, let's set this one to text, let's set this one to a whole number. I've now changed that in raw data budgets. This, of course, was referenced by staging budgets. So if I go to staging budgets, well, we can see it's still pulling from raw data budgets, but notice that the columns have changed. We're no longer looking at date times over here. So anything I do here flows through. Essentially, it's kind of like setting up a reference in Excel to a cell where you say equals A1. Anything you did in A1 would therefore flow into whatever cell you've actually referenced. Okay, so same kind of a concept here along the way. So at this point, I'm now going to go again. We'll say close and load. We're going to load all these guys in, and I'm going to change budgets to go and say load to the data model. Now, at this point, what I actually have is I've got three tables that have been loaded to the data model. I've got sales, I've got categories, and I've got budgets. And I can actually jump into Manage Data Model. So this is just the same as the Manage Data Model from the Power Pivot tabs, the same Excel one. And you can see that my tables are actually showing up inside here. Okay, so if you haven't used Power Pivot before, this is basically like a pivot table's pivot cache, but it's actually visible, so you can see what's going on. In addition, I can come over to Diagram View, and I can take my tables. So I'm going to put category here, and I'll put sales here and budgets here. And I can now make a relationship between these two tables. So category to category, category to category there. So that's kind of cool. Another really important thing when you're building your data models, and I actually really wish this happened by default, is when you make these relationships on a one-to-many basis here, the one that's on the star side here, you should always hide. So we're going to go right-click and hide. This prevents a user from putting these on a pivot table, and that's important because this one cannot cross-filter this table over here. You want to be using this guy here because it can filter both of these. So I always hide these, get them out of the client's view so that they can't actually mess things up and cause themselves problems a little bit later on. All right, so that's the first part. We've actually gone through and we've actually set this up. We've got the basis of a data model. But in order to create things like this that are putting dates down the side, I really need to have a separate calendar table. So what I do at this point is I want to build a calendar table for my data model so that I can link it together with the other tables here. I want to link date to act as a separate table on this side. But the table that I need has to have a series of dates that goes from the beginning of my fiscal year all the way to the end of my fiscal year, and there has to be one entry for every single day with no gaps. If you have gaps, you can potentially end up in a scenario where your DAX measure doesn't work properly. So we want to avoid those. Now, as it happens, there's a pattern to do this with Power Query. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build that up. We're going to start with the table that has the earliest possible date, and that's going to be my sales table. So I'm going to start at this little level in the middle here called staging sales. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to reference this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a specific query here that finds the very first date of the fiscal year for my sales table. And there's a pattern for doing this. We can right click and say remove other columns. Now the important thing here is that I made a reference to staging sales. I'm not doing this in the staging sales table. If I did this in staging sales, it would flow through into sales and then I would lose these columns in the data model. So that'd be a bad idea. This is one of the great things about having a staging layer in place is that I can actually make multiple changes off of this and it doesn't impact my ability to get my data model table set up exactly the way I need it. So I'm going to come back to staging sales here. I'm just going to rename this and I'm going to call it start date. Now inside the start date, I've removed all the other columns. So I'm just down to my dates. I'm now going to go and run a filter on this one here to say date filters. And we're going to pick up the is earliest. And that gives me the earliest date that's in here. I'm now going to go right click and remove duplicates. That will get rid of all these duplicate values. So I'm down to just a single value. I'm now going to take this and convert this to the beginning of the year. So we're going to go transform, date, year, start of year. Now at this point, things can diverge a little bit depending on whether or not your fiscal year starts January 1st or whether or not your fiscal year starts at a different point during the year. If my fiscal year end started on, say, I don't know, October 1st, for example, maybe I have a September 30th year end, I would need to add a column here and actually shift my date one way or another. I'm not going to do that right now because it does get a little bit more complicated. For right now, I'm just going to pretend that I have a January 1st year end. It's always going to work. One of the big things that I didn't sort of mention on this is that even though on my remove duplicate step I had January 1st, I will always force this to the beginning of the year because we always want to make sure that our calendar spans the entire fiscal period. And what happens if there's a snow day on January 1st and we don't actually have any sales? So there wouldn't be a record there. I don't want January 2nd to be my start date. I want the 1st. So that's why I always force it. And again, adjust it via another column. And I have a pattern for dealing with that we have in our Power Query recipes that'll allow you to switch it for different periods. The next step we always do, even though this looks like a date, we always force it to be a date because it makes the next step always work 100% of the time. And that is right click on the date itself, not the column header where you get all kinds of options, but right click on the actual date itself and drill down. And this gives me the beginning of the fiscal period, you'll notice, as a calendar item. So that's my start date. The next one that I need to do is I need to get my ending date. The pattern of this is very, very similar, but I actually want to pull this from a different table. I'm going to pull this one from the column that will always have the latest available date that I have. Now for me, that's going to be in my budgets table. So I'm going to use staging budgets. That's why I created the data stage. This is a question that comes up all the time is, well, could you use the sales table for this? And the answer is yes. It really comes down to what table will always have that latest date. If you're a company who does budgets the way that budgets are supposed to be done, in other words, before sales happen, you could use the budgets table. But if you work for an organization like I used to work for, where budgets didn't get approved until 3 months into the year, so we were just running without a budget for the first 3 months of the year, then the budgets table would be a bad choice because in January you wouldn't have a budget, so your budget would only extend out to the end of last year. We're going to pretend that this company always budgets in advance, and that's why we can use the staging budgets table. If we didn't, we'd have to use the sales table and increase the year by 1 just to make sure that we're always good. But in this case, staging will work for my budget. So I'm going to right click and reference. I'm going to rename this one here to end dates. And at this point in time, I'm now going to go and start running that calendar pattern, which once again was right click, remove duplicates. Oh, my bad. Let me just go back for that. That wasn't what I wanted to do at all. I'm going to delete that step, right click. Let's go remove other columns first. We want to reduce it down to as little data as possible for this stuff. Then we'll remove the duplicates. Much better. Got to follow your own work, Ken. Once we've done this, I'm going to filter to the latest date. So date filters is latest. I'll also point out in this one here that I actually did the remove duplicates and the filter in the opposite order here. This is not intentional. It really comes down to which step will help me remove the most data at one time. If you feel that it's this way, then that's good. If not, we can always say, I'm going to go and move before, so I'll just switch the order of these steps. What I now have is my source, removed other columns, filter to the is latest date. That looks like it removed a lot better or a lot more data, so this would be a better way of going at it, and then remove the duplicates from that. I hear some noise in the background, so just checking to make sure there's no question coming in on this one. It doesn't look like it, so I'm just going to quickly go and remove a mic. Again, if anybody does have questions, by all means, throw in your the hands up emoji, and we'll go through and let you come off and talk. So I don't want to cut you off on this. I just want to make sure that we're not distracted as we go as well. Okay, so I've made the pattern consistent between my start date and end date now. That looks like the most efficient way to handle it this time. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to force this one here to be the year end. I have the year end, but I've also been in scenarios where the budget only gets done up until June, so we want to make sure that we run it the rest of the way. So we'll go transform, date, year, end of year, force it on that, reset the data type just to make sure the next step always works, right click and drill down. Just as a technical piece of information, by forcing the data type before we drill down, we get this, change type 0. 0 refers to the first row of the change type step. If you don't force the data type, there are occasions where this actually comes back and hard codes the data in there, and then the pattern doesn't update in future. So that's why we're actually doing this, is to make sure that it looks like this. What I'm now going to do is I'm basically going to go and say, let's do a close and load, and we'll load both of these guys as connection only queries, because the next step of this is the calendar table, and I want to load that to the data model. While I can create all of these things all at once, I would need to commit them, load them as connection only, then change the load destination. So by committing these, especially if I'm concerned about stability, I can save my workbook, and then I can come back and create the calendar table. All right. Creating the calendar table works like this. We need to start from a blank query. On your Get Data menu on your Data tab, you can do that. It's under From Other Sources and Blank Query. One of the things that Monkey Tools does is we recognize the value of blank query, so we actually have it right up here on the ribbon. We can go in and say, cool, let's go and start from blank query, and away we go. I'm going to open my queries pane just so I can see the names of my queries. You'll notice that I have my new query here called Query 1. I'm going to rename it to Calendar. This can be done at the beginning. It can be done at the end. It doesn't really matter. I just want to make sure that I know what I'm actually working with here. The main reason I open the queries pane, I need to make sure that I spell these two things correctly when I'm putting them into my formula. Inside the calendar table, if you call them start date and you case them the same way that I have, the formula to create your most incredible calendar is this. It's equals curly brace. I'm going to go with number.from, open my parenthesis. I'm going to put in start dates, close my parenthesis. You'll notice I'm putting extra spaces in here. This is entirely optional. You don't need to do this. It just helps make the formula look a little bit more breathable and readable. I'm now going to go with, I'm going to go from my start date, up to my end date. In Power Query, we use 2 periods, 2 dots. This is kind of like Excel. In Excel, we use a colon. So in Excel, the 2 dots are standing on top of each other. In Power Query, they fell over. So, no big deal. It's just looking at things a little bit different. We're going to go number.from. We're going to call this one end date. And there we go. What happens here is the start date is a date, the end date is a date. We're converting it back to its numeric equivalent, which gives us the date serial number. That's the number of days since January 1st, 1900. When we do this, we get a nice little list that shows us a list of all of our date serial numbers that go from the beginning to the end. And the reason we do this is because I can't actually create a series of dates from start date to end date. Now, for people that work with us, there is a list.dates formula. I just don't find it as robust as doing this particular technique, because with list.dates, I have to work out how many days I want. In this one, I just got to tell you what the start and end date are, and I don't have to do any math, and that just makes me happy. So there we go. We've got this done now. This is a list. It's not super useful in this format to us. Well, that's not fair. It can be, but to be honest with you, for most people, we're just going to find it a lot easier to work with if we convert it to a table. When we convert our list to a table, we'll get this dialog. The secret here is to press OK as fast as you possibly can, because you're never going to change a default here. So we'll say OK, and this now gives us a very attractive looking calendar table, right? So what happens in this case, unlike the list, we actually have all of our commands available to us again. The list, all of these were grayed out. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call this one, oops, we're not going to put the caps lock on. We're going to call this one date. I'm going to change the data type to be a date, and boom, there we go. We've now got our calendar table. This is actually all we really need if all we're doing is driving a timeline. It's just a column that looks like this, but I'm going to add a couple more columns along the way as well. So I'm going to go to the add column. The recipe for doing this is go to add column, select the date column first, then go to date and add the ones that you want. So we're going to add a date year, and then we always go back, select the date column again, and then we'll add the other items that we want, like, say, name of month. I'm going to transform this one, though. I'm going to make it a little shorter. We're going to go and extract the first characters. We're going to extract the first three. There we go. We've got a month name of January now. That looks a little bit better. I'm going to go back to my date column, add column, date, month. I'm going to grab the month number. And then, of course, I could do other things as well, right? I could go and I could grab, say, the day, day of week. That's going to give me my numeric indicator for day of week. I could go back and actually grab the name of day as well, for example. And then I could, take this one and shorten this one down and say, let's go transform, extract first three characters. I use transform, not add column, because I don't really care for long month names and long day names. I find that they're too long in chart titles. I always prefer to go with these guys here. So at this point, I've now built a calendar table that's going to work for my model as well. It's got my granularity that's required for my dimensional model. That is perfect. That's what I need. It's got all of the other items set up that I might want to actually put on my pivot table as well and drive my pivot chart. So I can now go and say home, and this time I'm going to customize my load destination, close and load to, and I'm going to choose to load my calendar here directly into the data model. So there we go. We've now got our calendar table coming along, and hopefully it should load 730 rows to cover the 2 years of dates that are actually in here. Once again, I can jump back into the data model. I can see that my calendar table is actually here. That's brilliant. So I can now go and say, let's link this, my unique values from the calendar table, to the many repeating values that are in both my sales and budgets table. Again, this is set up as a many, so I'm going to go right click and hide from client tools. This one here, there's a star on this side, so that's the many side of the relationship. We're going to right click, at least we're going to try. For some reason, Power Pivot has decided it doesn't want to play right now. There we are, that's better. And we're going to hide from client tools again. All right, so now I'm actually in pretty good shape with my data model. There's actually one thing I do need to change though for this, is that my calendar is right now not going to be sorting correctly. So I'm going to fix the sort order for this. I'm going to go back to data view. Inside my calendar, when I go and put something like month name on a pivot table, by default, if the data is in the Power Pivot data model, unlike a standard pivot table that uses Excel's sort order for these things, a custom list to sort, inside Power Pivot, we actually have to define the sorting order here. Otherwise, we get alphabetical by default because this is a text-based field. So inside here, on my month name, on the Home tab, I'm going to select this, and I'm going to choose to sort this by a different column. So we're going to say sort by column. I'm going to choose to sort my month name by the month number. Okay, so here. So every time I see January, I want it in the first position. February would be in the second position, and so forth. So we're going to say OK to that. And in the wonderful design of the user interface, you see absolutely no indicator whatsoever that you've done that, but we will see that when we get to our pivot table. The other thing, while I'm here, I'm going to grab day name. I'm going to sort this one as well. The big trick about sorting day names, you never sort day names by day of month. The reason being is that if you look at enough individual days, there is a good chance that day of month, Monday, will have 31 potential matches for it. Tuesday, 31 potential matches. Wednesday, 31 potential matches. That's not going to work. We always want to sort day name by day of week, because every time we see Monday, it's always 1. Every time it's Tuesday, it's always 2. providing that you haven't messed or changed the Power Query settings. You may have these set from 1 to 7 instead of 0 to 6. Honestly, I don't care. I'm never going to look at day of week on anything that I do anyway. I'm always looking at day name. So I'm going to sort this one now by day of week. And at that point, there we go. That could now be set properly for what I need. As a matter of fact, if I'm never going to use day of week, I could even do this. Right click, hide from client tools, and not even show day of week on my pivot table field list at all. So let's go drop back. And what we're going to do is we're going to start building up this, this little pivot table over here. So I'm going to move these guys out of the way for a sec. These are just pictures, but I'm going to start building this thing right here.
One moment, Ken.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we have Jessica that has a question just before starting the new
Fire away.
part.
Hey, Ken, that was mind-blowing. So my question is, do you know of any reason that anything that creating a date table over in the Power BI side with DAX can do better than over in the Power Query editor? Or is it literally apples for apples?
Well, it's not apples for apples. I am... What does a date table in the Power Query editor or Power BI or DAX do better? Wow, there's a big difference between these things, right? So the DAX version tends to be or can potentially, if you're using a formula for it, require recalculation, which means that it can actually hit the formula engine while you're doing a slice or a dice on your data, which means there's potential overhead that can be involved in there. On the other side, the Power Query editor, when you're actually loading your data, you are pushing a load process up front, so your data refresh can take longer. Personally, I do not believe that all time is created equal when I'm working with these things. I would far prefer to push more resources to the initial data load and make someone suffer a 3-minute refresh for their data than extend the life or slow down any slicing and dicing operations. Because if someone clicks a slicer or a filter and it takes 20 seconds to recalculate, they will come back and tell me that the file is unusable. Where a 3-minute refresh cycle, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, they'll go get a coffee. The other thing that I feel with with Power Query is that I have the ultimate control over absolutely everything I do with Power Query to add the columns that I want and need. I never get anything else. Where when you're using some of the calendar functions in DAX, or especially if you leave the automatic date time intelligence on, it creates columns that you don't actually even need sometimes. So, you know, for me, I'm always about Power Query. And part of the big reason for it too is that inside Power Query, I'm not restricted to building a calendar table that goes on based on what Microsoft thinks I need. I have the ultimate control to build exactly what I need. And I mean, this goes from a standard 12-month fiscal year to a standard or to a non-standard 12-month fiscal year to 13 fiscal periods, 4-4-5s. I got asked yesterday by one of my friends, can you build me a 4-4-5 calendar that starts on the first Monday of every year, and whenever there's or first Monday of February every year, and whenever there's an extra week, just make that a 4 instead of a 4-4-5, make it a 4-5-5. It's like, holy cow. Okay, sure, yeah, we can do that, no problem. And that's kind of the flexibility there. So for me personally, all calendars go to Power Query. I don't use DAX, but I'm biased because I love my Power Query. So hopefully that sort of helps explain some of it. Okay. No other questions coming in, Christian? We're all good to go?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start building my pivot table. You'll notice, of course, on the Insert tab, we have a pivot table button. Today, I've got the very special from Power BI with OData, so it looks like we've got a strange little thing going on with a bug in Excel today. That always makes my presentations more fun. We've also taken the buttons on the pivot table tab, and we've actually built a pivots and filters menu right on Monkey Tools that tries to bring all of your pivot tables and pivot charts and everything else together in one place. So I'm going to use this one. It's the same buttons. This is just a convenience feature. So I'm going to insert right here a pivot table, and I'm going to use this workbook's data model because I'd selected a blank cell. It defaults to the data model. So I'm going to go and say OK on this one here, and there we go. And now I can start going in and pulling in the individual fields that I actually want. So for example, for my calendar table, I could put year on rows, and I could go and then put my month name on my rows as well. You'll notice they're sorting not in alphabetical order, but they are sorting correctly inside the order that I chose from the data model. And now I need to get to adding my transactions and my sales and my budgets. Now, what a lot of people will do in Excel, they'll just come over here to sales and they'll grab amount and they'll put it onto the values column. Now you can do that, but that's what we call an implicit measure. The problem with implicit measures, in my view, is that, well, they're lacking a lot of things. We lack the ability to set up default formatting for them. So if I want to reuse this exact same measure with the same formats on my chart later on, I can't do that. I'll have to customize the formats over here and customize the formats over here. So this is where we get into the world of building ourselves our own DAX measures for these things. Now, I know that my good friend Christian has actually sort of customized his Monkey Tools ribbon for this. I do want to say, out of the box, we can't bring you the Power Pivot Measures dialog. I can't get access to this programmatically, drives me crazy. But you can actually customize your Monkey Tools menu to put this on. The thing I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to make sure that I create my new measure right from here. I'm going to use the standard Power Pivot editor, and I'm going to go and say, let's call this one here sales dollars. And we're going to go and write ourselves a nice little formula here, which is just sum of, and we're going to go with the sales amount. So a very simple DAX measure for this. I'm going to set this up as a number. I'm going to set it up as a whole number with a 1,000 separator. I'll check the formula because that's always a good practice to do. I'm really glad that I got no errors when writing a formula as simple as this. That just makes me feel like I know what I'm doing. And now I'm going to click OK. And there we go. We got our nice little sales numbers that match what we see on the side over here. So this is all cool. One big difference that you'll notice by this one, just for reference, this guy here is set up with a September 30th year end. I'll get into that when we build this with Monkey Tools. I'm now going to build myself another measure. This one's going to be a new measure here. I'm missing my transactions. So let's do a transactions one. This one I could not build via a standard drag and drop from the pivot table. I have to use DAX for this. This is going to be a count rows of my sales table. Okay, so we'll check the formula there. That looks good. Again, this one's going to be a whole number. Again, not a super complicated formula, but one of the things I do want to call out on this one here, though, is that while it's not super complicated, if you don't work with DAX very much, this can be unreachable. How would you even know that this exists? So we're going to go back and we're going to say OK on this, and we'll see that we get our nice little transactions measure. And I'm going to change the order of it just to be somewhat consistent with my pivot table over here. Finally, I'm going to come back, go to new measure, and I'm going to write myself another new measure here called budget dollars. And this one, just like my sales dollars, is going to be the sum of my budgets amount. Once again, a number, whole number, 1,000 separator, check the formula. Yep, it all works. And we say OK. So I've now rebuilt my pivot table, barring only the extra nuance of making sure that my year end starts, or ends on September 30th and starts on October 1st. But I've got a nice little pivot. So that looks pretty good. I could now, of course, basically take the same thing here, and I could come back and say, OK, cool, let's go back and let's insert a pivot chart. From my pivot chart, again, I'll use the data model here. And if I want to build a chart that looks like what we have on this side, in theory, I should be able to go and say, let's put on sales. Let's put on my budgets. It's funny, I stored it on the sales table, but whatever, that'll work. And then on my from my calendar table, I'm going to put year. Actually, I'm going to make myself a timeline. So I'm just going to go right-click over here and add as timeline. So there we go. I'll go back to my pivot chart again, and we'll put our axis for a month name on here. So here we go. Put that on the axis. And then we'll reformat the chart because we don't need all these ugly buttons all over it. So we'll put the legend down the bottom, format legend, put that at the bottom. This is just a little bit of cleanup because, you know, every time I do a presentation, I can't stand these buttons. I got to get rid of them. I wish I could make this a default. And then, of course, the last thing that we need is that every chart by default has to have a title. This is a very, very important part of the story of the chart. Every chart in Excel today gets created with a title except pivot charts. Go figure. And there we go. So now I've got this thing set up. The very last thing I need to do is basically take my timeline and link it to my pivot table. And there we go. Now I can go in and I can say, look, you know what? Just show me the data for 2018 and my pivot chart and whatnot. These guys should recalculate. You can see these bars are moving just a little bit. And if I drill into, say, months for this, I can drill it right down to look at only 3 months of data there. So I've built myself some business intelligence by using Excel to make this all happen. So this is a simple model, right? We've gone through and we've built these things up. We've built the calendar table. The only other things that I would do with this, there is a small nuance that we have going on the side on this part here. The only other thing that I would change around this is I would jump into the data model here, and I would come back and I would say, look, you know what? These guys here, they have the amount. Because I've built explicit measures, I don't want people to use these. So I'm going to go hide this from client tools, hide this from client tools. And at this point, what you'll see is when I jump back over to the data model, this recalculates. We now see sales with the pivot table, the Sigma icon here that says these are all of my measures. It pops to the top. And honestly, if I'd done this 100% right, let me just move one of these guys. I'm going to move budget and stick it on the budgets table. So we'll store that over here. Instead, close. What we should now see is our budgets table is acting like a folder for these guys as well. So this is pretty good. If I go with active, I get rid of all of the Excel tables that I don't want to pull in directly. I now know exactly what's going on inside these things for my different components to see what's going on, budgets and whatnot. So that's cool. I've actually built up my model, right? Easy to do and everything else. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and do a real quick file save as here, and I'm going to go and just call this one build better. We're going to take this guy here. I'm going to save this on my desktop. I want to make sure that I give Christian what I promised him on this one here. So we'll do a save as. And what's going to happen is I'm now going to go to publish. And you'll notice that when I come into publish, I have the ability right here to publish to Power BI. And I have two options. I've got upload, which I'm going to do first. And it's publishing to Power BI. I can see down in the bottom corner here, and we'll wait until that one actually happens before we move on to the next one. Hopefully this won't take super long, but it's always fun when we're trying to deal with our bandwidth with Teams. We're also going to go back to publish, and we're going to say export. So I've got two different options for here, and I'm going to run them both in this particular case. I'll wait until this one runs, and then we'll actually jump into Power BI and look at it. And then we'll come back and build some stuff with Monkey Tools. So here we go. I'm going to go to Power BI, and we're going to jump in and see what we've actually got. So this one here is based on when I exported the data. And what you'll notice is that I now have all of my fields with my budgets and my sales and my calendars and my categories over here. So I can go in and I can say, look, you know, I'd really like to build myself a clustered bar chart with my sales and my budgets on it. And maybe I want to put year and month name on the chart, and away we go. I'm now building Power BI visuals right off of the original Excel data set for what I'm actually working with. Now, I have no idea why I put year in there. I kind of wanted to have year on my axis instead, so it gives me a drill down layer, and there we go. Now I can actually work with that, and I could rebuild the tables. I'm not going to, sort of dwell on this thing here. Basically, what I'm dealing with is I'm building a report off of a data model inside Power BI that was published directly from Excel. So that's kind of a cool thing here. I'm now going to go back to my workspace. I'm not going to save the changes on this because I want to show you something else here is, let me see here. It was build better. This is the Excel workbook that I published. So this is the first option that I worked with. And if I go into build better, you'll notice that I can come in here and here is my worksheet. These two guys are images up the top. This one though is an actual timeline. And right like that, I can go and slice and dice these things. Now the deal is these are saved on my desktop, so I obviously can't schedule a refresh around any of these guys here, but if these were saved in a SharePoint directory, every time I make changes, this resyncs, I think it's about once an hour. Whatever's saved in Excel Online actually just comes in with this. So if I make a change to the worksheet, this will update. If I've published to Power BI, I can actually schedule the refresh. If I've done the export, I can actually schedule the refresh on these things, provided that the data source is something that is cloud-based and whatnot. So I'm not going to dwell on that a ton, but I do want to just sort of make that as a point here, is that I've actually now got data inside Power BI. I can share directly to Power BI, and if I've set everything else up right, at this point I can even schedule a refresh. There's been no Power BI desktop involved in this whatsoever. Excel is my data studio. I can still build my models. I can still push things out and share them in a secure way. So it's kind of a neat little sort of feature that we can play around with as we go with this. Now, what I want to do at this stage is I actually want to go and revert back to where we started at the beginning of the day, and I want to rerun the same process with Monkey Tools. And I want to show you, because we've taken about 45, 50 minutes to go through and actually build this. And granted, we're talking about as we go, so you could probably do this faster if you're really rushing. But I would say that the last time that I timed myself on running through this entire process, building this entire model from start to finish, let me show you one more thing before we go, actually. The last time, or when I time myself, it takes me about 15 to 18 minutes to build this entire data model manually, okay? I do want to show you this. The query dependency chain that goes behind my query structure looks like this, okay? So this was my raw data sales, feeding to sales, or staging sales, which goes into the sales table. My staging sales goes to start date, which fed my calendar. Raw data budgets, we've got budgets loaded to the data model, the end date comes through this way, and there we go. I haven't really done anything special with categories, but I'm set up if I need to. Maybe I need to build some bridge tables or whatever else, okay? So that's the query chain behind it, and then of course you've already seen the data model, but we're going to take a look at that one more time just to make sure that, that we recognize what's actually going on inside this. So the data model we built looks like this, okay? We've got a sales and we've got a budgets table with our measures on the sales and budgets table. Okay, now let's start over. So I'm going to go File. Oops, there we go. We're going to go Close. Get rid of that one. And I'm going to reopen my Build Better Begin. So this is where we actually started at the beginning of the day. So once again, let me just show the queries here. There's nothing in here. If we go and we take a look at the data model, always helpful when it opens up behind, but you'll notice that there's nothing here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to rerun this entire process, but I'm going to show you how we can actually speed it up with Monkey Tools. The very first thing that we need to do is we obviously need to create our tables and pull these data tables into Power Query and get them to the data model. We've built this little tool here called Table Monkey. And what Table Monkey does is it builds up this user interface right here and says, look, I've recognized that you've got 3 tables in the workbook. You've got categories, you've got budget, and you've got sales. And I say, okay, well, that's really cool, but I really want to see these before I pull them in. I'm just going to go click on budget. And you'll notice that it activates the worksheet and selects the budget table. There's categories, there's rows. The other thing that's really important about this is that it tells you the name of the underlying table here. And I've decided that I actually don't want this called budget. I want it called budgets. More importantly, if your table was called table 1, you would see that here. If you click it, it selects it. If you right click it, you can actually rename it right here. I'm going to call it budgets. And what you can see is that if I select the table and go to table design, it's renamed it to budgets right here. Okay. This is also something else that's super important about Monkey Tools is that while Monkey Tools is running, unlike the Power Query Editor, you can still interact with Excel. Power Query locks you out. We don't. Okay. So you have the ability to create multiple staging layers. If you don't want multiple staging layers, you can dial that down and we save your default. So this is direct to the data model. I'm going to set them this way, but I can also control them on an individual basis as well, if you want to. If you don't want to load a specific table to the data model, you can say, I want to create categories as connection only. That's what the yellow table is. Or if you don't want to load it at all, you can actually turn it off. Okay, so we got some options to configure these things. You can also rename the end table if you want to call it something different. You would just right-click to rename it there. For me right now, I'm happy with the staging setup. So I'm going to go click Create on this, and you can watch either here or over on the side as to what's actually going on. Right now, it's created all of my raw data and then all of my staging queries. It's now going through and it's creating each of the individual queries that loads to the data model. And here we go. I called sales. That took 15 seconds. So I don't know if you timed me when I went through first time and actually created these, but it took a lot longer than 15 seconds. All right, so that's the first part. We've now got our tables set up. The next thing that I want to do is I want to create a calendar table. But to do that, I actually want to base my calendar table off of staging budgets and staging sales. Now, the one thing about Monkey Tools is that we do have to have your calendar loaded or your tables loaded somewhere in order to be able to change them. So I'm actually going to show you another feature from Monkey Tools, which is called Destination Sleuth. What Destination Sleuth does is it comes and gives you a visual representation of where all of your tables are actually loading to. So we can see that budgets and categories and sales are in the data model. These other guys here are loading to connections only. I'm going to temporarily switch budgets and sales to load to worksheet. Now, if you want to do this manually, you've got to right click on each one and wait for it to complete. For me, I'm going to load these to tables on new worksheets. I'm going to name these new worksheets after the query names themselves, and I'm going to change the load destinations. And at this point, it's now created both of these guys here, and they're loading very, very obviously to Excel tables. We've named the worksheets after those. Cool, that's all good to go. Let me just close that. I'm now going to go and use Monkey Tools to create a calendar table using Calendar Monkey. Now here's the deal. I could create my calendar tables against sales or budgets. I prefer to do it against the staging sales and staging budgets. Okay, that's why I changed the load destinations. This is entirely optional. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 12-month calendar. But you'll notice here that we give you a lot of other options, 445, 454, 544, 13 months, no problem. I'm going to change this to use a non-standard year end. I'm going with September 30th because that's the year end that Excel Guru uses for tax purposes. I'm going to call my calendar. I'm going to load it to the data model. I never trim it, but you can if you want to. And I'm now going to go and say, let's load this from the staging sales table. We're going to grab the earliest date in the staging sales date column, and we're going to load it to the latest date in the staging budgets date column. Next. At this point, you get to choose which columns you actually want. And I've got a couple of really cool ones in here. ISO week, Europeans love ISO weeks. So we have both the regular and the precise versions of this. You basically check the columns you want. We recognize all these and we save them as your default for next time because we recognize that probably you want the same kind of stuff for your calendars most of the time. If you're using a 445 or variant, you will also see the period ID columns as available choices over here as well. I'm going to click Next. For any tables that are already loaded to the data model, if you've chosen them in the first screen, we automatically check the boxes for Add Relationships. Because I'm using staging sales and staging budgets, which load to Excel workbooks, we can't create relationships because these aren't in the data model, so we don't flag these. I'm going to choose to that I automatically want to create relationships between budgets and sales as we do this. And I'm now going to say Create. And here we go. It has created a start date with my earliest date, my end date with my earliest or with my latest date, and it is now creating the calendar table that is going to load to the data model for me. So I just got to wait for the data to load. This does take a little time because, of course, it's got to process the information and whatnot, but it shouldn't take too long as we go through. So here we go. It's loading, 1,096 rows for this thing. Last time we did this, there was 720, but we're actually using a non-standard fiscal year right now, so there's actually going to be more rows in this case. You'll notice it gives you the feedback that you've created everything successfully here, and it will tell you that, hey, we've done this work, and we also recommend that you make some changes. Unfortunately, we can't hide columns from the data model on the many side of the relationship. The Excel team doesn't give us a way to do this. This is something that if I could ask one thing from the Excel team for Christmas, there's actually two. I'd like to be able to programmatically create calculated columns, even though I hate them, people use them. And the other thing is I'd like to be able to hide and unhide columns from the data model. For reference, this dialog, you can keep this active so that when you go and say, cool, I'd really like to go and say, show me the data model, you can actually have that side by side so you can follow the advice for it. If you've already done this though, and you recognize what this is, you can actually check the box, we will save this as a default so that next time this closes by default, okay? So at this point, what I want you to notice when I jump inside here, you'll notice that my calendar has already been related to my budgets table. So I can just come in here and say hide from client tools for both of these guys. Now I'm going to take the opportunity here to also link these guys. So we're going to hide these guys. Okay, so I've got to do a little bit of work there. And on the amount side, I'm going to hide these because again, I'm going to create some measures for these. The last thing that I need to do, which unfortunately I can't automate either, is I do need to set up my sorting orders. So I'm going to jump back into the calendar here, take my month short. I'm going to sort this one by the month of fiscal year. Here's my ISO week numbers and my ISO precise week numbers if you need those. The last thing is my day short here. I'm going to sort this one and I'm going to sort it by the day of week just so that we actually have it as well. There we go. And of course, I could hide the individual columns I don't want as well. That's the data model work I need to do at this point. There we go. We can now go back and say, okay, cool. I don't actually need these two tables on worksheets anymore. So I'll go back to Destination Sleuth. We'll select these two guys here. We're going to set them back to connection only, and I'm also going to delete the worksheets that they live on. So I just want to be careful with that one that I know there's nothing else on it. Once I'm done, yep, we'll remove those. And there we go. They're now back to connection only. The worksheets are gone. It's like I was never there. Awesome. Can we start rebuilding what we have over here? So we're going to come back here, insert a pivot table. All right. Now, for some reason, my pivot table field list has decided not to show up. There we are. Okay, from my calendar, I'm going to go put my fiscal year on rows, and I'm going to put my month short here. Notice it's starting with October. Perfect. That's better. I now need to create my transaction, sales, and budget measures. Again, I'm going to use monkey tools to do this. We have a measure monkey here. Under the basic explicit measures, we give you a user interface driven way to go and create measures. So if I say that I need something for sales amount, for example, we'll tell you, oh, you probably want a sum on this one. Here's the DAX signature. But you can say, no, you know what? I actually want an average, and I want the mean average where we treat text as 0, and we will actually put in the average A function for you. Or if you want the minimum, we'll give you the smallest value or the maximum, or if you want the standard deviation, we will build the DAX formula right there for you. All you need to do is change the name, configure your defaults here, and create your measure, and you're done. So that's how handy, because you don't have to learn how to write the DAX. You can do it all through the user interface, much like Power Query does a lot of things. I'm going to do something different, though. I'm going to use this tool here, which is our multiple explicit measures, and we're going to create multiple explicit measures at once. Now, if you happen to like using a measure table, you can add one here. I'm not big on that, so I'm going to skip that. We automatically pick up all your linked fact tables. If you want to use your dimensions, you can do that. We don't recommend storing your measures on dimension tables. If you need to show disconnected tables, you can do that. We don't have any. Not a big deal, but basically what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click next. Those are the defaults we think will be most likely useful for you. At this point, it comes back, it says, okay, well, we've recognized that you've got a numeric column here for budget. We're going to go and actually, it's more than that. We recognize that the amount column is not used in relationships, which means you probably don't want to aggregate it. Same with the amount column here. I'm going to give this a name of sales dollars, but I'm also going to add another aggregation. I'm going to take the sales table and I'm going to count the rows in this one here. This is going to be my transactions. Okay. So at this point, I'm now setting up very quickly the measures that I need. Boom, done. That didn't take very long at all. You'll notice because I hid all of the other columns, my sales and my budgets tables are now showing up properly. So I can go and say transaction, sales, budgets. There we go. They've already got the right formats on that have been decided on. I can now go back as well and I can go and say, cool, let's go pivots and filters, take a pivot chart. There we are. And once again, with this guy here, I'm going to go and put on my sales. I'm going to put on my budgets. I'm going to take my calendar, right click on this guy here. We're going to add it as a timeline. There we go. And oh, I forgot my fiscal months on this guy here. So let's go and put our month short on the axis. And at this point, I can get rid of this and do the rest of the formatting, of course, that I like to have on my charts, where the legend's at the bottom, where I'm not showing these horrible, ugly field buttons, and where I actually give it a nice little title like sales versus budget. So there we go. Sorry, guys, I just cannot do it with, or cannot leave this thing undone here. So sales versus budget. And at that point, we've now replicated what I took the first 45 minutes to do. Oh, no, I haven't. One small thing. I forgot to link this to the other pivot table. There we go. Now we have. That's it. So we're using a variety of different things through our monkey tools in order to be able to drive this, right? The table monkey that you see here, this is one of our forever free features that we actually have. Calendar monkey is a pro feature, to be fair, in order to build that one out. Our two measure monkeys for building basic and explicit measures, both of these guys are in our forever free feature set as well. And our destination sleuth is as well. So, there's a lot of stuff here that will still allow you to go and build things quickly along the way. So the whole idea here is we're trying to make this super easy to get started and do things quickly. We have a couple of other features that I just want to sort of show off really, really quickly as we're actually in here already. One of them is our query sleuth. This is a full query dependency tracer, so you can actually look at budgets and see exactly what the chain of queries is that led to it. We show indented M code for all these things. You can actually update this if you know your M and update it back into the data model to make it work. Once again, you can actually interact with Excel while you have this open, and it won't lock you out, which is kind of cool as well. So that's one of the features that we have here. We also have this thing called a DAX sleuth. The DAX sleuth, again, allows you to take your measures and modify them. If there were dependent measures, you would actually see that we would have that in here as well. One of the other cool things about the DAX sleuth is that I can see that my sales measure, actually, let's use transactions. Transactions is only used on pivot table 3. If I click on it, it'll select the pivot table. But sales is used on pivot table 3 and used on this chart as well. So this is kind of cool because you can actually start moving through and seeing where your measures are actually used. We do have an indenter inside here as well. We also have the ability, if you've got nested measures, to flatten them down so you can see them all in one place, even duplicate and make updates to your DAX right from here as well. So some cool features around this one. The final thing that I want to sort of just call out on this one before I get into one interesting component is we also have this pivot sleuth. And what Pivot Sleuth does is it actually brings you back a look at all of the individual fields. I've got some echo going on over here. So, all right, cool. So it's always interesting to hear myself 5 times. So the Pivot Sleuth here actually allows you to see what potential issues there are with your pivot table as well. If you happen to have, the relationships maybe needed message or whatnot, this will actually give you some feedback around it. I mentioned that we do things like helping you audit. If I go to Model Sleuth, for example, and run the model summary, this will now go and run a very quick summary. While the DAX Sleuth and the Pivot Sleuth are available in the free version of Monkey Tools, this is the one feature that even in the pro trial is not fully functional. We believe there's a lot of value inside this, so we actually suppress every other row, but just give you a sample of what it looks like. But for fully paid people, full pro members, you basically get a full report that actually shows you, in this case, how many tables, relationships, where are your data sources coming from, what are the relationships that are actually in there, the filtered directions, are they active, the cardinality. Of course, Excel only supports many to one, but that actually tells you something. We tell you observations. Is your table disconnected? Is it snowflaked? Here's all your stats with how many unique values you have, whether your columns are hidden or whatnot. Your measures, are the measures being used? Are they explicit or implicit? Plus all of your individual query statistics as well, where they come from and what the precedent data sources are. There's other things around in this one as well, like how much memory usage you're actually using for your models. If you're in Excel models, are you even using the columns? Can you remove them? And we even show you some cool reports where you can come back and actually say, look, you know what? These columns, the calendar tables aren't even used. You can actually reduce your memory by this. And this is a huge thing for trying to make your models more efficient. Now, what I want to show you from an interesting point of view on this one too, though, is that we also have the ability to go and do some other cool things around this. And this is sort of the last thing I want to show you before we end off as to what's going on in here. We can connect to Power BI models and actually bring this in and get the same kind of model summary reports. You can use DAX Sleuth and Query Sleuth on your models as well. With the DAX Sleuth, you can make changes to your DAX and write it back to the Power BI file should you decide to do so. I actually see more value, to be honest with you, just with the Model Sleuth, being able to actually pull a full report like this, sorry, not like that one, like this one, in order to see exactly what's being used here. And as I say, that's the first step I usually take in the Ask the Expert session. But there's also some other really interesting components around this, because once you've connected to a model, we have the ability to actually export a backup of this model as well. And I'm going to show you something kind of interesting as to how this actually works. And this is a sneak peek at something that we're working on. This is not actually available in public. As a matter of fact, you guys are the very, very first group that is ever going to see this in action here. So I'm going to import one of my backup files. This one here is coming from a Monkey Tools backup, although I could pull from a Power BI model. We will also, if you have an open Excel workbook that has a data model, you'd be able to import that as well. From this guy here, let me just jump down into Monkey Tools demos. Sorry, not that one, my bad. Let me go back to my desktop. Here it is. So this is pulling from a backup that I exported from a Power BI workbook. I'm going to import it into book 2 here. Everything's ready to go, so I'm just going to click import, and what you'll see right now is that this is starting to create the queries right now. It's loading the budgets table into an Excel data model. I'm sure that everybody that's worked with Power BI or worked with Excel and then Power BI knows that you can go to Power BI and you can say import your Excel model into Power BI, but there's no way to go the other way. And this has always bothered me because I prefer to do most of my work in Excel, and I'll get a Power BI model and I need to actually do some work on certain things. So what I'm doing right now is I'm recreating the query chain right inside Excel from a Power BI model. Okay, so this is really cool and something that I'm actually been wanting to do for an awful long time. Once I have that in place, 13 queries have been imported. I can actually scan my thing here. Everything looks like it's good. I can go and import the data model components. Now, it does recognize right away, though, that I've got a couple of pieces that are missing. My date table template does not exist. Now, this is because Power BI automatically created that because I had that option turned on. I don't care. I don't want that. It doesn't necessarily matter. But this one's a little bit more of a problem. Metrics is a single table that I use to store all of my metrics, all of my DAX measures. The problem is I created that by doing an add table button inside Power BI. I didn't use Power Query to create a metrics table. That's a challenge. I don't have a metrics table. It never brought it over because all we can import is the Power Query script. So I'm going to go create one. I'm just going to use Monkey Tools to do this. I'm going to add a measures table. This measures table is going to be called metrics. There we go. It's connection only. Bing. One row loaded. A little bit of advice from Power Query. That's all good. Now that I've created that, I'm now going to go import. And you see it's creating the relationships that were required. There they go. And now it's creating all the measures. And now if I go and say close my blank workbook, if I go and take a look at the data model, come on. Oh, yeah. Now it's going to crash on me. I think I say this is brand new, spanking new stuff. Let me do this. Let me go file, save as. I'm just going to call this one here demo. Boom, there we go. And I'm actually going to close Excel and I'm going to reopen that workbook. Close, thank you. Reopen that workbook and just refresh Power Pivot. Enable content, manage. And as you can see from my original blank workbook, here are all my tables. Here are all the relationships. Here are all of my measures. Everything's been imported back over to Excel. So, so that's something that it's not out yet. It's something that we're just getting ready here. The export backup is something that we use all the time when people ask us if for help with individual components. We can actually export and import these things. This is the cool thing. But as I say, with the import, I can actually go and say, look, you know what? From this guy here, you'll notice that I can actually import demo, and I could go and say, look, I want to put this into. I've got to do some work on this one. It's still very new, but I could. Our intent is you'll be able to pull this from one workbook to another, from a Power BI model to another, or from a Monkey Tools backup into another workbook along the way in order to be able to port and restore those models. So some interesting features that we have coming along the way. At that point, what I'm going to do, or at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out to my closing slides here, just to let you know where you can actually find information around Monkey Tools. I actually blog about Monkey Tools on my blog, not frequently enough. But that is where you'll find information. Also, whenever I do a new meetup here, I try to release a new feature if we can, or at least talk about one that's coming up. You can find out more about it and actually even download free trials at excelguru.ca/monkeytools. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all that kind of good stuff as well. That is basically where I'm at this point. So I am totally open for questions from anybody along the way here. If anybody's got any individual questions about this stuff, I would love to entertain them and hear them from you.
I have one, Ken.
Sure, fire away.
For the table monkeys.
Yes.
You really need to have tables formatted as a table, right?
No, actually you do not. So if I go to, let me go back to my Build Better Begin here, because I guess the question that you would have is, what happens if you've got data like this? We call it RNG data as a named range, okay? Because this is just a flat sort of set of data. So I've now got a named range here, plus I've got these guys. If I go and load my table monkey at this point in time, you'll notice that named ranges actually show up as well. So in order to get your data into Power Query, it has to be either in a named range or it has to be in a table. Once either of those two things are present, we read those.
Okay, thanks. Didn't know that.
Worries.
Learning every day.
There you go. Well, we pack a lot of stuff in here, and I mean, this is actually one of the things that's interesting with when I first started. I mean, well, I guess a year ago when we first started actually trying to sell Monkey Tools, there was only 2/3 of the items on the ribbon, and a lot of those were just the convenience features, right? I mean, in the last year, the things that we've sort of added on this thing, Table Monkey is only within the last couple of months. I mean, I actually made, I think I announced that in the Saudi Arabia Power BI meetup back in November. Calendar Monkey we released last July. Git Query from M-Code is relatively new as well. This is kind of a cool one that if you have some M-Code that you want to put in, just give your query a name, paste it in here, and create. Really, really useful if you're trying to help people in forums if they give you a code sample. I love that. Or if you have a battery of your own things to go. There was a lot of features that didn't exist. The measure monkeys, they weren't there. Pivots and filters weren't there. So, we've added a lot of stuff. So where it used to take me 30 minutes to demo all the features in Monkey Tools, it now takes me better than an hour and a half. And, that's challenging, but at the same time, it actually blows my mind when I look back at how much we've done and what it does. And I've now got people that can come to me and tell me, hey, I can use it to do this that I never really expected, which is awesome. So yeah, I'm learning every day too, man. There's all kinds of cool stuff out there. Any other questions? You say I'm happy to take any on this stuff. Would love to do any questions or answer any questions you guys have. Jerry, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, Ken, I'm just curious. We do a lot with SSAS tabular cubes, server-based. Any interaction with those?
No, I don't have. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because the Power Pivot model is a cube-based model. I don't have a lot of experience working on SAS-based cubes on a server, so I haven't actually even tried to go and actually connect to that to see what's there. I'm sure it's possible, but I don't know how long down the roadmap is for there. My primary target market for a lot of the people that I've been dealing with is self-service BI modelers. Once we start getting into the SAS-based cube, I see this starts to tip much more into the professional side. It would be interesting to know what other things you would want from that. I'm certainly not ruling it out by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not something that we've considered at this point in time.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Other questions? Anything at all? Very quiet, Christian.
Well, the chat is not working.
I know, it's frustrating. And then,
I felt so lonely.
I know how that works, man. I know how that works, and it's unfortunate because I know that there are people that don't want to talk in person. That chat is a vital part for this kind of stuff.
And I've checked the settings, and in the admin panel, it's enabled. I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
I'll
weird.
have to try it better next time.
Well, it's one of those weird things that happens. I mean, you just get into odd things with Teams. So, Gary Murray, I see that you've come off mute and off on camera. Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, the only question I had was actually about the pricing, but I went onto the website and checked it out. So, yeah, definitely impressed.
Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's something, as I say, we're working hard on. We have a developer in our office that is working. It's Abdullah that's working on this all the time with me, and we're building new stuff on a regular basis. Never fast enough for what we would actually like to do, but obviously it's there's a feature list there, which actually this needs to be updated. But as far as pricing goes, our pricing is, I mean, if you want to be on a full pro subscription for just a month, we allow that. That's $10. If you go into an annual subscription, there's a savings on that. It works out to about $8 a month. There's obviously no obligation to continue. As I say, I make a terrible salesman for the stuff that I try and do, because I tell everybody with this kind of stuff that please make sure you download the free trial first and try and make sure it works. I don't want to try and sell you something that isn't going to work for you. That's the biggest component on this. The other side of it is that we've actually worked very, very hard on this to make sure that the only person in your organization that needs monkey tools is the person that's building models. If that's lots of you, then okay, fine. You may need more licenses. But we are very much of a what we call a do no harm philosophy. What Monkey Tools does is it automates the process of doing work that you could do manually, but it makes it faster and makes it easier to do. You can build a full audit report yourself. You just got to do a lot of work to do it. But the big thing is that we never leave a hook inside your Excel workbook that requires our software to work. Once it's done, and we never will, that's a big thing. Once it's done, you can email it to somebody else, and even if they've never seen Monkey Tools, never even heard of it, everything will just work. And that's a very, very big piece that I want to make sure that people know. It installs without admin rights. I don't want to be proliferating through your entire org. I want to make sure that the people that need it get help, and the people that don't need it don't have to buy a license to the software, what we do. So, it's a philosophical sort of, piece from our stand that we want to make sure that you folks know. But, but if you are in that business of building and auditing models, we'd love to help you, because guess what? Some of this stuff is hard. We get that, right? So why not make it easier? So.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I will connect with you.
Thanks.
Any other question?
Other questions? Happy to take them all. Bring them on. Or just come online and say hi. I mean, whatever. Don't, let's not make Christian feel lonely.
Nope.
I recognize a few names in the chat group. Some of my friends are here too. So I mean, thanks to all of you guys for coming along as well. It's always nice to have your support, and even if it's virtually and not speaking, I recognize you're here and I value that. And for everybody else, thanks for coming. I hope you guys have seen some interesting stuff, and I hope that this has sort of opened your eyes to the point that we can do cool things and hopefully make your life a little easier. Again, one of the big things that I do want to sort of put out there is with this one, we've also worked very, very hard to make sure that this is compatible to install without admin rights, because we know that when you need to go to your IT and beg for the keys to install something, that's usually a dead killer. I would never tell you to avoid your IT department's policies. That would be a bad thing. You do want to be on board with them around installing software, but there shouldn't be a restriction there for getting that stuff in place. So just keep that in mind as well.
Well, thanks again, Ken, for the great session. I've learned a lot, even if I saw it before. I've learned again some new stuff.
Always
Thank you,
the
everybody, for joining, and I'll stop the recording now.